It was just past dusk when Major Tiana Brooks eased her unmarked black SUV onto the empty stretch of road, headlights cutting through the twilight like twin blades. She'd spent the morning leading a joint training operation at the federal base, and are outside the city, her uniform still pristine, a dozen earned bars gleaming on her chest, gold insignia catching every stray beam of light. If you glimpsed her then, you might have thought she belonged on a recruitment poster, someone to salute at first sight. But as she rounded a quiet intersection on the outskirts, the world she knew so well shifted in an instant. To patrol, cars appeared behind her, the red and blue lights flickering urgently, but no sirens split the air. There was no warning, no explanation, just the sudden imperative to stop. Tiana's heart remained steady as she guided the SUV to the shoulder, rolling down her window with the calm precision of someone trained to de-escalate conflict before it ever had a chance to ignite. In her rearview mirror, she watched one officer tap the glass with a flashlight, the narrow beam dancing across her badge. Behind him, another hovered, hand drifting to the grip of his holster. License and registration. The first officer barked, his tone clipped, eyes cold. The second simply stared. In that moment, Tiana's mind raced through protocol, legal, precedent, every rule she'd sworn to uphold and enforce. But she had no time for protest already. They were telling her the vehicle was flagged, ordering her to step out as if she were a low-level suspect rather than a federal major. With years of service etched into her posture, she complied without resistance, trusting that patience and discipline would be her strongest shields. Outside her SUV, the gutter flash of flashlight illuminated her face, drawing sharp shadows under her eyes. One officer forced her to the edge of the road, patting her down with rough insistence. The other pried open her passenger door, rifling through her duffel bag with an arrogance that made her blood chill. "You're interfering with a federal officer," she warned, voice steady, issuing a final chance to correct their mistake. They laughed instead. "We don't care what uniform you put on," one sneered. And just like that, metal clicked around her wrist, cuffed behind her back, seated in the back of a patrol car. She remained composed, military posture unbroken, even as the radio crackled overhead. There, hidden among the hum of traffic and muted authority, she allowed herself a single request. "Can I make one phone call?" It was simple, almost polite, but to them it was an afterthought. They rolled their eyes. They were wrong. That one call would shatter their assumptions and rewrite the rules of engagement in an entire system. Major Brooks didn't yell, she didn't demand. She simply dialed, and in that moment, the quiet power of her restraint became the spark that ignited a revolution in accountability, one that would ripple far beyond the precinct's walls and echo through the corridors of power. Major Tiana Brooks had driven this stretch of road countless times, the same curve, the same tree line, the same emptiness that pressed in at dusk. But as the first patrol car slid into her rear view, silent save for the whir of its engine, something felt different. No siren cut through the air, no flashing arrow pointed the way, just those red and blue lights dancing like a threat. She guided her unmarked black SUV to the shoulder, heart calm but senses on high alert. The first officer approached at a measured pace, the beam of his flashlight slicing across her dashboard. The second hovered behind, hand drifting toward his holstered weapon as if drawn by some silent alarm. Tiana's breath remained steady. She noted procedural lapses in her mind. No radio broadcast to headquarters, no explanation of cause for stop, no request for backup despite flagging a federal vehicle. Each misstep was a mental flag she'd record later, evidence for the real confrontation ahead. She rolled down her window and raised her license and registration, crisp and unruffled, handing them over without a word. The primary officer peered at her credentials through the flashlight's glare, then roughly ordered, "Step out of the car." No question, no polite framing, just a demand. Tiana's jaw tightened ever so slightly. She complied with measured grace, stepping out and closing the door behind her. She remained close enough to the SUV that its contours felt like an extension of herself, a mobile fortress turned temporary interrogation cell. The two officers exchanged glances as if confirming some unwritten script. In that moment, she realized this was more than an ordinary stop, it was a trap. But instead of panic, she felt a quiet surge of focus. She cataloged their uniforms, the lack of badges on display, the absence of body-worn cameras, another procedural failure. She would use every omission against them. Once outside, Tiana raised her palms in a gesture of compliance, keeping her voice low and steady. "I'm Major Brooks, Department of Defense," she said, voice cool as steel. "You're interfering with a federal officer. You need to stop this now." If the uniform could speak, hers would scream authority. But the two officers only laughed, a short, dismissive chuckle that cut through the crisp air like a knife. "Ma'am," one sneered, "we don't care what uniform you put on. You're being detained." Her mind flicked through protocols that govern interagency interaction. They had ignored every requirement: identification checks, chain of command, notifications, respect for jurisdiction. Yet here they were, certain of their own power. The insult stung, not because it questioned her rank, but because it exposed a dangerous assumption that a black woman in uniform could be dismissed as cosplay. She watched them like a CEO surveying board members who had underestimated her, all the while calculating her next move. She made mental notes: no cameras, no probable cause cited, no oversight. Each detail would be crucial once the undercurrent of this standoff shifted. As they advanced, their confidence swelled. One reached for her duffel bag, rifling through it with careless abandon. The other began a rough pat-down, fingers pressing into places that spoke only of intimidation. Yet Tiana did not flinch. Every violation was logged in her mind's ledger. She knew the weight of evidence, the power of a well-documented case. Their arrogance would be their undoing. She watched the younger officer's eyes flick away from her spotless badge, then back to her face, searching for signs of weakness. There were none. Her posture was unyielding, her gaze unwavering. To them she was just another suspect. To herself, she was an investigator gathering data on systemic failure. Then came the metal cuff scold, unyielding, snapping shut around her wrist. The click echoed like a verdict. They guided her to the back of the patrol car, forcing her into the cramped space meant for the accused. She sat erect, knees pressed to the vinyl seat, chest high, every inch the disciplined officer she was. The radio chatter crackled overhead as the officers exchanged casual remarks about processing this cosplay girl. They still didn't realize she had already won. She waited until they finished securing her behind the grill, then spoke with calm authority. "Can I make one phone call?" There was no tremor in her voice, only the quiet confidence of someone who knew exactly what that call represented. The younger officer sneered. "Sure, you'll get your call, but don't expect it to help." Their laughter drifted away as they moved back to the front of the car. Tiana closed her eyes for a heartbeat, silent and still. Then she recited the number from memory: Colonel Vega's direct line, secured channel, reserved for emergencies just like this. She heard the click as the officer handed her the phone, felt the hum of the device against her palm, each second stretched, the gap between rings and answers heavy with potential. Her heart remained steady as ever, her military training guiding every breath. This was her boardroom moment. One move that would turn the tables completely. As the phone rang, she pictured the corridors of power where her voice mattered. Her finger hovered over the button to transmit to encrypted lines. She pictured Colonel Vega at his desk, ears trained for the sound of her voice. The officers outside the car had already miscalculated. They thought she was powerless now that she was cuffed, but they had just triggered a protocol escalation they couldn't ignore. The patrol car's engine idled, lights still flickering against the approaching night. While behind the tinted windows, Major Brooks waited to make the call that would end their careers and rewrite the rules they so brazenly neglected. When the patrol car rolled to a stop in front of the small-town precinct, Major Tiana Brooks braced herself. The stark fluorescent lights of the holding area stood in sharp contrast to the dim glow of her unmarked black SUV back on the highway. Inside that sleek vehicle, she had commanded respect and certainty. Here, between the chipped paint of the booking desk and the scuffed concrete floor, she was meant to be nothing more than another detainee. They guided her inside, uncuffed her, only long enough to snap mug shots and record fingerprints, treating her like a common criminal. The stale air reeked of burnout coffee and institutional indifference. Every clerk, every guard who passed without so much as a glance, became part of the evidence against them. Tiana's eyes missed nothing: the absence of a supervising officer to verify her credentials, the haphazard stacking of paperwork, the half-typed arrest report with blanks left unchecked. Each omission, each procedural deviation, etched itself into her mind like a string of charges to be filed. She could almost hear the hum of her own internal audit. This was no accident, no misstep born of genuine confusion. From the moment she'd pulled over onto that dusty shoulder, they had treated her as an outsider, an interloper masquerading in authority. And now, here in this precinct, they doubled down: no sirens, no backup, no thought to her chain of command. As they processed her, she sat rigidly upright, her posture as immaculate as it had been behind the wheel, her chastened uniform untouched by the grime of indignity. The red and blue flashes from patrol cars outside danced on the windows, a silent reminder that she'd lost control of the scene, at least for now. Then came the moment she'd been waiting for. An officer tossed her the phone through the barred door of her holding cell. As if it were a road accommodation, Tiana caught it with calm composure, slid it from its cradle, and pressed it to her ear. She dialed Colonel Vega's direct line. "No." Intermediaries, no waiting room. For a moment, time held its breath. On the other end, she imagined Vega leaning forward, brow furrowed, listening for the weight behind her voice. She spoke deliberately. Colonel Vega, Major Brooks, I am being unlawfully detained. Badge ID 947 Alpha. Immediate protocol escalation. Her words landed like stones in still water. Then came the silence, a pregnant pause. That stretched far longer than 30 seconds should ever last. Back in the booking area, an officer bent over the computer screen, fingers frozen above the keyboard. Another pause mid-step, head cocked, as though catching an inaudible alarm. Suddenly, the locked door shook. The overhead lights flickered. Through the translucent glass of the entrance lobby, Tiana saw silhouettes against rows of headlights. The unmistakable profile of 3 black government vehicles. Their dark bodies rolled in like thunderheads on the horizon, engines idling. So low she could almost hear the power trapped within. Men and women in perfectly tailored suits stepped out, badges clipped to their belts. Earpieces tucked discreetly beneath jackets. The precinct lobby, once humming with pedestrian routine, snapped to a rigid halt. In an instant, everything changed. The 2 officers who had cuffed her exchanged panicked glances, the younger one a patrol rookie. She'd later learn paced like a caged animal. The senior partner leaned against the wall, eyes wide, mouth dry. They watched as a lead agent, low-slung and authoritative, strode across the lobby floor. His polished shoes made no sound, but the weight of his presence reverberated through the tile. He stopped precisely at the glass of her cell and looked in, his gaze assessing. Major Brooks, are you injured? He asked quietly, though every ear in the room caught the words. No, she replied, keeping her shoulders squared. She rubbed the faint red marks on her wrist, a testament to the rough handling, but nothing she couldn't bear. The lead agent nodded once, then pivoted on his heel and addressed the 2 officers who had arrested her. You compromised a federal officer, he stated flatly, voice like steel. Obstructed classified transport. Names. The officers shrank beneath his gaze. One opened his mouth to speak, but got only a choke. The other stared at the floor, toes pressed against the baseboard. At that moment, the undercover CEO within, Major Brooks, unfurled in full force. She disguised her power and restraint, and now she revealed it. One of the suited agents drew a handheld scanner and lifted the discarded ID badge from an evidence bin. A single beep confirmed what the officers had dismissed as cosplay, tier for authorization, national security transport class. The uniform they'd mocked sheathed in silence had become both shield and sword. The scanning device chirped again, sealing their fate, security breach level 2. It was more than a phrase. It was a verdict. By the time the precinct captain emerged from his office, expecting confusion or a misunderstanding, he found himself staring down the barrel of a full-scale federal review. Phones rang unanswered. Internal Affairs had already been looped in. The Department of Justice bore down like an avalanche of subpoenas and sealed indictments. Sealed packets were handed to every local officer on duty suspensions, pending terminations. Career-ending notices that bore her name as the cat list. And though ethics trials and administrative hearings would drag on for months, the damage was irreversible in real time. The officers who had treated her like an imposter were themselves unmasked, as violators of procedure, victims of their own contempt. For Major Brooks, this was the ultimate power play: to step quietly into the storm, to ask for nothing more than a single phone call, and to watch a system unravel around those who thought themselves untouchable. Each envelope handed out, each suspension order served, each badge clipped and weapon collected was a line item in her ledger of justice. There was no public spectacle, no triumphant press conference, just the silent exodus of 2 couriers, escorted into separate interview rooms, their uniforms now trophies of disgrace. Outside, the black vehicles idled, their engines still, as Tiana Brooks walked free from the precinct, her posture as unbroken as the day she strapped on her insignia. The trap had been revealed, and in the reckoning that followed, she had rewritten the rules. The shockwaves from that evening at the precinct rippled far beyond the small town's limits. Within days, headquarters in Washington had issued a memo mandating a comprehensive review of every local law enforcement agency's identification protocols. Cross-verification became the new buzzword. No uniformed person could be treated as an unknown until their credentials were verified against federal, state, and local databases. Departments scrambled to update software, rewrite policy manuals, and schedule mandatory seminars on interagency respect. Bulletins went out from the Department of Justice and the Department of Defense alike, outlining precise steps. Officers must request photographic ID, radio and badge numbers for confirmation, and follow a standardized checklist before any detention could proceed. Failure to comply would now result in automatic suspension pending a full internal affairs investigation. Meanwhile, the story had ignited a fire in the community. Grassroots organizers created an online petition demanding transparency and accountability, not just for Major Brooks' case, but as a safeguard for anyone who might find themselves underestimated by those sworn to protect. Within a week, it had amassed over 100,000 signatures. Local news ran headlines like "Justice Under the Uniform," and talk shows featured civil rights advocates dissecting the policy failures that had led to such a blatant misuse of authority. Social media exploded with the hashtag #CheckTheStripes, sharing clips of Brooks' composed face as she stepped into her SUV, footage that became emblematic of dignity under fire. The momentum was unstoppable. City councils passed resolutions urging enhanced training on systemic bias, and state legislatures introduced bills to codify the new verification protocols into law. What began as a quiet traffic stop had become a national debate on respect, procedure, and the very nature of power behind the scenes. Major Brooks did none of the public grandstanding that might have been expected. There were no formal ceremonies or televised interviews. Instead, Colonel Vega quietly presented her with a private commendation for exceptional restraint under duress, a medal tucked away in her locker rather than pinned to her chest during a public parade. Invitations poured in for her to speak at federal seminars, to share the granular details of her experience so that others could learn how easily authority could be misapplied and how just one calibrated action could restore order. She agreed to keynote a handful of these sessions, always prefacing her remarks with the same caveat: "My story is not about me." In those closed-door rooms, she spoke of the importance of silent leadership, of the power in observation and documentation, of creating change not through loud proclamation but through strategic, unassuming influence. Her words became required curriculum in several training academies, where recruits watched reenactments of her ordeal, then worked through role-play exercises designed to sharpen their verification instincts. In her hometown, an anonymous benefactor later revealed to be a retired general who had once overseen Tiana's early career, established the Tiana Brooks Scholarship Fund. It offered scholarships to young women entering military or law enforcement training, with priority given to those from underrepresented communities. The scholarship's mission statement echoed Brooks' philosophy: for those who walk the line with discipline, dignity, and strength. Each scholarship recipient received not only financial aid but mentorship from officers who had attended Brooks' seminars, ensuring her legacy of quiet empowerment would trickle down to the next generation of leaders. Perhaps the most visible testament to her impact came months later at Fort Burfield's Officer Candidate School. In the main hall, above a display case containing Major Brooks' ID badge, someone had etched for simple words in polished metal: "Assumption ends where accountability begins." New cadets learned that phrase almost as soon as they arrived. Instructors would pause in the middle of drills to remind trainees that a uniform was not an invitation to take shortcuts, nor was a badge a guarantee of unquestioned authority. It became a litmus test. Whenever someone hesitated to verify a colleague's credentials, a sergeant would quietly ask, "Where does assumption end?" And the recruits, conditioned by Brooks' story, would answer in unison, "Accountability begins." In classrooms across the country, the human element remained at the forefront. Cadets who had watched the video of Brooks' arrest and subsequent release often approached instructors afterward, eyes wide with the gravity of what they'd seen. Some shared that they would never again view an insignia as mere ornamentation. Others confessed that they'd previously assumed any uniformed person was trustworthy without question. Veterans, too, spoke up, recounting experiences where better verification might have prevented tragedy. The narrative shifted from abstract policy to personal pledge: "I will check the stripes before I pull the cuffs." They would vow it was more than a slogan. It was a cultural shift that began in the quiet corners of precincts and academies, but carried the weight of systemic reform across state lines. Retired officers incorporated case studies of Major Brooks into continuing education programs. One seminar detailed the precise timeline of the traffic stop, highlighting each procedural misstep as a cautionary tale. Attendees scrutinized transcripts, watched dashcam footage frame by frame, then spent hours discussing how they would respond differently. The emphasis was on empathy and precision, understanding that respect required more than a nod. It demanded verification, communication, and a willingness to pause one's own assumptions. As departments reported improved compliance rates, fewer wrongful detentions, and smoother interagency cooperation, it became clear that Brooks' story was more than an anecdote. It was a blueprint. In every new academy pamphlet, every updated policy manual, and every quietly handed scholarship check, the imprint of Major Tiana Brooks remained indelible. Her one phone call had set off a chain reaction that swelled into a movement, not with fanfare, but with the quiet seriousness of a CEO who leads from behind the scenes. It was proof that true leadership need not be loud to be effective, that the softest voice, when wielded with conviction, could resonate far deeper than the loudest siren. And as each new cohort of officers found themselves standing beneath the polished metal words, they understood the gravity of their charge. In a world quick to judge and quick to act, sometimes the greatest power lay in the pause between the two. From the moment Major Tiana Brooks asked for that single phone call, the balance of power shifted in ways no one could have predicted. What began as a routine traffic stop morphed into a masterclass of silent authority and Undercover CEO, revealing that true influence isn't broadcast by sirens or shouted commands, but asserted through calm precision and unwavering confidence. In one composed request, she exposed procedural failings, dismantled assumptions, and set off a chain reaction of reforms that resonated from small-town precincts all the way to the halls of Congress. Her restraint became her greatest weapon, proving that power wielded quietly can carry far more weight than power asserted loudly. It was a victory not marked by fanfare, but by systemic change, a testament to the fact that sometimes the softest voice can topple the loudest injustice. Now, we turn to you. Would you have stayed that calm under cuffs, trusting that one call could change everything? Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us whether you'd stand silent and strong, or if you'd have fought back in a different way. If Major Brooks' story moved you, if you believe that real leaders lead with restraint instead of force, hit that like button and subscribe. Every share spreads the lesson further. Respect must be earned, never assumed, and accountability must always come before action. And this is only the beginning. In our next episode, we'll unveil another high-stakes Undercover CEO mission, this time inside the boardrooms of a global corporation where the stakes are higher, the secrets are darker, and one whisper could topple an empire. You won't want to miss how our next leader infiltrates the inner circle, gathers the evidence, and pulls the strings from the shadows. Stay tuned next week. A new face, an even bigger secret, and another chance to witness the quiet force of strategic leadership.